My name is Joshua Berg. I'm speaking today with Abby Stein. She is the author of Becoming Eve, My Journey from Ultra-Orthodox Rabbi to Transgender Woman. You can buy the book anywhere that books are sold, I'm assuming. Is that correct?
Yes, you can get the book pretty much everywhere. My preferred way for people to get it are local bookstores, or there's a website called indiebound.com. If people look up the book on there, they will find both local bookstores that are selling it locally and also how to order it from local bookstores. So I'm a big fan of local bookstores, so that is my favorite option, but you can buy it pretty much everywhere.
I appreciate supporting local bookstores. I wrote a review of Abby's book on thehumanist.com if you're interested. I just want to say that I very, very much admire your incredibly courageous journey.
Thank you.
In this podcast, what my hope is to find out how meaning is made, where meaning is found, by asking the questions. The podcast is called Heart, Mind, and Spirit Exploration. So I want to know what moves the heart, what occupies the mind, and where does the spirit live? The questions to keep in mind as we talk. So to summarize your story, if you don't mind me doing that.
Please, go ahead. I always love, I say it so much. I love hearing what other people pick up from it.
Well, I'm going to summarize it very briefly, and then we'll get into it more directly. But you were raised as a boy. Can I say your given name? Is that okay?
I prefer not.
Okay, then I won't. You were raised as a boy in an ultra-Orthodox community in New York. You are the direct descendant of the founder of Hasidic Judaism, the Baal Shem Tov. You were trained as you were expected to be. You were eventually ordained as an ultra-Orthodox rabbi. However, early on, you knew that you were female. You eventually left your ultra-Orthodox community, went off the derech, as they say. And today you identify as your authentic self, as a transgender woman with the chosen name, and hopefully I pronounce this correctly, Avigail Chava?
So my Hebrew name is Avigail Chava. My legal name, aka everywhere else, is Abby Chava. Chava is my middle name legally and in Hebrew. But Abby is a nickname that comes from Abigail, that in turn comes from Avigail, which is a biblical name. So yeah.
Okay.
So,
and a little later, I would like to ask about your chosen name as well.
Please.
Yeah, I'd love to. But let's start early on, keeping in mind what was on your heart and your mind and in your spirit when you were under 10. When you were a youth, you were raised in this very sheltered community. You didn't, according to the book, you didn't know that such a person as a transgender individual existed. The false gender binary community was defined by this binary, as far as I understand, and you were treated as, because of your heritage, your lineage, as a prince, essentially.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you said very early on in the book, maybe 3 or 4, that you knew you were a girl, but that was an evil thought. As a youth, how did you reconcile these things? I mean, young people have a way of finding meaning and understanding their world. They have to understand their world. How did you go about doing that?
Well, I like the way you're looking at it, and the questions looking on like what's in their mind, and I think they sometimes feel like very existentialist questions, but at the same time, I think even people that don't think about it, that's almost a pun. I think that even people who don't think about it still do think about it, meaning everyone has their own version of it. I say that a lot, and I guess my day job, so to speak, I work in public policy, and I have a lot of political conversations all the time. And then you always run into these people who are like, oh, I'm not political. And then you start breaking it down and you realize, what do you mean you're not political? You have opinions, and there are people who are making laws based on their opinions. And if you don't express your opinions, people are going to make laws that are contrary to your opinions, whether you realize it or not, whether you are political or not. And I think the same goes to our minds. Well, I would say that I think children as a whole, and me specifically, until today, I have a very creative and active imagination. I'm very good at creating elaborate, imaginative schemes, so to speak. And I think as a child, through different ways and different means, that was, I guess to some extent, what kept me sane, if you can say that. I don't know if I was sane, but at least nominally, it kept me moving was my ability to dream up and think of different ways of how to do that and how to survive. And I think some of the things that stick out, both for me when I think back to it and as well in the book, there were times when I had this imaginative idea of doing a full body transplant. And to me, that went beyond just, oh, there's this hypothetical idea where you can do a body transplant, but actually physically collecting newspaper clippings of articles talking about organ transplants and like kind of planning it. I would say my imaginations went beyond just being in my head, and actually whatever my 7-8-year-old self thought that could actually happen, but actually taking some steps, so to speak, in that direction. And I think one of the most powerful moments for me, and from what I hear, a lot of people will find in the book as well, is when I grew up at age 9 and realized that is impossible and turned to prayer, which is very interesting. And I would say the God that I grew up with is very different than the God that most people think when they think about a Jewish God. And when I mean a Jewish God as opposed to a Christian God, the God that I grew up with is a lot more Christian, for the lack of a better word. I call that God the boogeyman in the sky, which ironically, though, when you read Hasidic texts and Hasidic teachings and theology, and the same in Kabbalistic, mystic teachings that the Hasidic movement is based on, you find a very different God. You find a God that, according to pure philosophy, would be considered atheism. Which is very interesting, or humanism to some extent. This concept of God being everything, or the way I like to look at God being the sum total of existence, or rather not even God being, but rather humans using God as a word for the sum total of existence. Anyway, I didn't mean to get into that right now.
No, absolutely.
But at that time, God was that creature, for the lack of a better word, who controls everything and does everything. And in my mind, it was God can do everything. And therefore, I wrote a prayer and I actually wrote it down. It was in Yiddish, which was the only language that I spoke at the time, and some Hebrew, but colloquially we only spoke Yiddish. I wrote a prayer, which I would say every night, saying, I want to wake up as a girl.
Wow.
That was another way. There were some other elaborate schemes of imagining being reborn as a girl, and many other things.
It's amazing how resilient children and children's minds are, and how they find a way to accept something that necessarily an adult would have much more trouble accepting because of their creativity and because
I
of
wouldn't
their
say I necessarily accepted it ever.
Okay.
Like I don't ever remember being like, okay, whatever, I'm a boy, that's it. I was never okay with it. It was a lot more constantly trying to find ways. I would say the resilience at that time was a lot more not giving up,
right,
as opposed to making peace with it.
So even though in reality you knew that you were destined to become, at the time, an Orthodox rabbi, to marry a female, to have a family as a male, but there still wasn't ever a complete acceptance of that, even in your youth.
Even as a young child.
You know, you're interesting. You're talking about God and the Hasidic movement. I know the Baal Shem Tov talked about the divine cannot be known apart from the cosmos, I think is what he said. Almost a pantheistic idea that God is everywhere.
It's not just, I mean, I would say there are two main schools, so to speak, if you want to look on God and the Hasidic movement, both of them coming from Kabbalistic teachings. There is one that I would say is even more universalist, humanistic, more overarching, which says that God is legitimately everything, which also means, or there's a Hasidic saying that also says God is everything and God is nothing. Right. Which is referring that with the God that is nothing part refers to this like a belief of no duality. That makes sense. There's no like any separation. There's no like divinity, which is somewhere out there that created everything and has like a plan and everything separated from existence, separating from humanity, separated from everything else. Again, I come back to that term. The sum total of existence is what we call, or what people throughout history have called God. There's another one that I think more people know when they think about mysticism. It's this idea that there's a spark of God in everything. And I think that adds up a lot more with the conventional terms of theism, where there's a bit more, and it's again coming to this point where believing that there is a spark, or in Hebrew it's called a nitzah, the spark of God, literally, and everything. And I mean, not just living objects, so in tables and paper. But the one that I have been relating to a lot is that concept of some sort of existence, which at the same time means that identify or feel like sometimes you are a believer, though I don't necessarily like the word believe. I say sometimes you can relate to a concept of God, but at the same time be an atheist from a philosophical perspective, which is very interesting. And something that I think people in the world today, not just in politics, but also philosophically, we love putting labels on it. And we always expect people like, do you believe in God or not? And I've had that question actually asked me once. Someone asked me once at an event, do you believe in God? And my usual response to that question is, define belief. What do you mean by belief? Define God and we'll talk.
Right.
And that person got so angry and was like, no, this is a yes or no question. Do you believe in God? Yes or no? But then I told them, listen, if your idea of God is yes and no, that's your concept of it, then no, I don't.
So interesting.
Yeah, which I think has been, we love, and I see that the same with the LGBTQ community, with religion, with sexuality, with so on. Everyone's trying to put labels on everything. And what I like to say is, listen, labels, the only thing that needs to be labeled are clothes. Clothes belong in a closet. Closets are not meant for humans.
So interesting. I was listening to NPR, and Maria Popova, who's an intellectual, was talking about words that have become vacated of meaning because of overuse or misuse. And it's almost, I don't use the word God, and I won't talk about it.
If I may use politics, just like the last 24 hours alone, I would say in the New Hampshire primaries and everything, and I've seen at least 20 articles talking about there's a one, I think, in New York Times yesterday of last night, of how the night that socialism became mainstream, and people are talking about this boogeyman called socialism, and then we're let's break it down a bit, and people are oh, maybe it's not a boogeyman, it's the way I look at it, or what I thought that, I don't know, the American socialists like Bernie Sanders or Democratic Socialism stands for is not exactly that boogeyman. I thought it's just exactly, it became a title, a term, a label void of any meaning, any real meaning.
Well, if you don't mind, I'd like to break down your evolution of, you don't like the word belief, but your evolution of
belief is fine. I mean,
yeah, as far as believer, yeah. I'm sorry, yeah.
I just haven't. I always used to struggle since I was really young, actually, as a teenager, actually even preteens. I used to struggle with this concept of belief, because to me, belief at the end of the day suggests a form of faith. It's just a form of not understanding something and believing anyway. People wouldn't say that I believe that it's day outside right now. You wouldn't say that. I mean, maybe you can, and maybe there's a definition of the word belief where it's simply describing something that is a reality. But in general, when people say the word belief, it's believing or accepting something that you cannot feel, something that you cannot understand fully. The word that I like a lot more is to say I relate.
I see.
There's a certain concept that I relate to as opposed to believe it. That makes any sense.
That it does, absolutely. It connects very much, I think, with heart and spirit, much more so than belief. In your book, you talked about your evolution of what you relate to from when you were young to when you started questioning, when you started doing your deep studying and trying to understand meaning, what is meaningful. You read forbidden books, you said, both Jewish texts and atheists. I think you mentioned Gersonides, you mentioned Yaron Yadan, which religion defies its creators. I think Gersonides wrote the War of the Lords, I believe, about miracles, about divinity, and you had, and I'll use the word transition, referring to a transition from one way of thinking to another way of thinking, to relating to one thing as opposed to another. Can you talk a little bit about that transition of belief as you were exploring and learning, and who you read and why it changed your mind?
Well, here's the thing. One of the questions that people ask me a lot is, if hypothetically, if you were in trans, whichever way possible, whatever, think about it whichever way, would you still have left the community? And I'm quite certain that yes. And I think for anyone who knows, it's possible to separate ourselves from parts of ourselves. So it's hard to know who I would have hypothetically, all these hypothetically if and the, like people ask me a lot, like if you could have been born a different denomination, a different religion, I'm like, what's the point of all these questions? Because really we don't know. I see our lives are very, from a scientific perspective, it's very like the butterfly effect. The slightest thing that happened to us as children or as adults could change the course of our entire lives. So
absolutely.
It's hard to say that, but one of the things that I tell people a lot is that I believe that ultimately I would have questioned their belief system regardless, but it probably would have been at a later stage. And I write in the book a bit about it. I didn't get to put in all my stories, but like points of like when I'm in 8th grade at 12 years old, starting to ask certain questions, or even at a younger age, having these doubts that are questioning everything. They don't necessarily exist. I'm not aware of many. They exist, but not many Hasidic teenagers question God. Yes, you get people questioning some of the hardcore I would say beliefs. For that, I can use beliefs. Some of the hardcore beliefs of the Hasidic community, which don't make a lot of sense. And you get that, you will get teenagers who will get smartphones, talk to the opposite gender, so to speak, and do stuff like that. But I don't remember, at least when I was growing up, I wasn't aware of anyone else that questioned God or questioned that Judaism is the right way and the only way even to go. And I think what caused me to question that was my own identity. And I would say growing up, there were two major identities. And that might be true for someone even outside of a fundamentalist community. And one of them was religion, which to me was like culture, religion, family, everything kind of went under that umbrella of being Hasidic. And that part of being a Hasidic boy, that's what I was told. That was the other like big part. And I think that is probably true to most people. Like who you are, your family, gender, your family, culture, and everything, and your gender end up impacting so much. Maybe not as intensely as living in a fundamentalist community, but they still end up impacting a lot of who you are. So for me, that was definitely the fact, what caused this original questioning, which I think was a good thing, was that I was trans. So in so many ways, I actually see being trans, or growing up and having to struggle with that, as a blessing, because it caused me to think deeper. It forced my mind to look into and be like, okay, I'm being told all of these things about religion and how to live my life, and that there's only one true way, and there's all these like only one true religion and one God and one chosen people and whatever, all of these kind of sentiments. And then, but I'm being told these things by the same people that are enforcing a gender role on me that I was pretty much always convinced. I don't even know why. And I sometimes think, how come I questioned everything and I never questioned that? Because I never questioned my identity. It's like very clear to me. And it was, so there was a two-part. There was a part of me that was, okay, I can trust you, but there was also a part of using that as an outlet because I needed to express. And I had this like almost existential need to express my discomfort by doing physical rebellions and doing physical things. And gender wasn't an option. And again, as you mentioned before, I didn't even know that there are other trans people. The only identity that I was aware that they are people who are not part of that was the Hasidic belief, Jewish beliefs, or belief as a whole.
Yeah.
And therefore, I think that was the I'd say that was the switch that led me to ask certain questions that most people, I wouldn't say most people, most preteens and teenagers in the Hasidic community might not ask. And on top of that, the switch that you mentioned before, Geschenities, and I describe it in the book a bit in detail, the specific text that I read, because while you might look at it, you might feel like it's not a big deal. When I look on it today, if you want to express a hypothetical belief spectrum, and I'm twisting this directly, where being a blind faith believer is on the left, and being a total atheist who only believes in science and whatever is on the right.
Right.
I would say that then Geschenities is quite on the left of that, in that spectrum. He's still quite a believer. Yeah. But it wasn't as much what he says, than rather the way he's talking about it that switched this, like, I flipped the switch of, he was he was questioning something that was existential to what I was told growing up, something like divine providence, something like what we call in Hebrew Hashgacha Pratit, which is this like personal God who controls your day-to-day life in every sense of the word. Reading a text from someone who was canonized. He was maybe controversial, and we might have been told not to study everything, but he is still considered a holy, sacred, canonized Jewish medieval commentator, even the Hasidic community. And it was the switch, it was the flip rather than exactly what he says. It was this idea of reading from him saying, in very clear terms, that God doesn't intervene. And I think people might have different interpretations. I don't know where he would fit in today's philosophical terms, but I think very close to like this watchmaker God, but he believes that God created a world and a natural order, and most of the time he just lets it go. Well, sometimes it breaks down, like a watch, and you take it to the mechanic. So every now and then, though he believes extremely rarely, God will intervene. Which seems like a God that I think a lot of people believe in. But to me at the time, that was mind-boggling. Yeah. And it flipped a certain switch that just in a very strong way freed me. In a very strong way, once I read that, nothing was off limits anymore. If you can question divine providence or the personal God, you can also question God as a whole. If you can question whatever the miracles that are mentioned in the Bible, forget about later on, might not have actually happened. It's just the way he says it, it's something that people perceived as being a miracle as opposed to actually having been something miraculous, then why not question everything else that people claim is God's hand? And if so, what's the point of prayer? If God is not going to intervene, then and so on. It's just like, I feel like once you let go of that, not everything was open.
Right. It's well, first of all, I love your perspective of identity as a blessing. It's amazing. Yeah, it seems like many of the things, and I mispronounce Gershonides?
Gershonides? I don't know, to be honest. That's like the Greek or Latin term for his name, I think. In Hebrew, he's called the Rabbi, which is an acronym for his name.
Oh, okay. But he's respected in the Orthodox community, yet it seems like many of the things he's saying could be the words of Baruch Spinoza, who's excommunicated from the community. So it's very
interesting. Here's the thing. I think if I may say that, and I think historically what happened here is medieval times were a bit easier. You were still allowed to say things, and there was a lot of infighting still. Yeah. And also you got to realize Gershonides, I believe, lived in Spain, if I'm not mistaken. I think it was
France. He was from
France. Okay. Yeah. But I would say like it was before Judaism at least the philosophy became so Christianized, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
And it was a period of where people had different beliefs. Like today, for example, we have the 13 principles of faith, okay?
Right.
That were written by Maimonides. By the time Maimonides wrote it, Maimonides was an outcast. A lot of people in the so-called establishment didn't like him, but there was different beliefs about the most existential things. But what happened, I would say a bit later on, specifically to Ashkenazi Jews living under Christian rule, and to some extent also to other Jewish communities, was that they got influenced a lot by the church, and their beliefs became a lot more codified. That by the time Spinoza came around, he was no longer allowed to say, though, to some extent, I might be mistaken in that, but I think even Maimonides was excommunicated by some people, not by this community as a whole, but I think there were some people who put in what's called the cherem, which is like excommunicated. Okay. Yeah, I think so. And I know even today, like for example, in Hasidic communities, in today's Hasidic communities, they don't talk about it, and they accept the 30 principles of faith. But until fairly recently, most Hasidic people did not like this. Now, in a lot of Orthodox communities, they say the 30 principles of faith on a daily concept, almost like it's a prayer.
Really?
Until recently, that didn't exist, because a lot of these 13 principles of faith of Maimonides that are considered the belief system are actually in contradiction with a lot of Kabbalistic and Hasidic beliefs originally.
Wow, this is all very interesting.
Yeah, stop me if we get too philosophical.
No, well, actually, let's switch it up a little, and we'll talk about, if you don't mind, love. When I read your book, or we can sing about it. When I read your book, I went in with presumption that there would be resentment And I didn't sense any resentment.
I unfortunately don't hate anyone. Is that a bad thing?
even when you spoke to your father at end, there was this need to connect out of love and a disappointment that, in the epilogue that he couldn't speak to anymore, but there was never an anger, resentment, any of this. It was just love.
The closest thing that I think I ever got to hate and resentment was pity.
Uh-huh.
To some extent, which I still have a lot when I listen to certain stories or talk to certain people. But sorry, were you going to finish the question?
No. Please go ahead.
So I think I really don't hate. I think I disagree with a lot of things. I think specifically my father, which for him, the biggest reason why he stopped talking to me, and it became very clear, was not religious. It was cultural. And it was that it doesn't fit into his worldview. And more specifically, he is afraid and ashamed of what people are going to say and think. To give you an example of it, and that has been a big part of my work, people ask me a lot, what is your goal here? You're an activist. What is your goal in the Hasidic community? And while when I started out, I used to say it was that I want the Hasidic community to be transphobic.
Right.
Which sounds really weird, but growing up in a community where until I was 20, which is when I went online for the first time, I didn't even know that trans people exist. And that is how it was until 4 years ago. The majority of the Hasidic community wasn't just, they weren't transphobic. They were not even aware. And just that is awareness. A big struggle. Like if there was a way, and I compare it a lot to people leaving the Hasidic community, okay? I knew from a young age that that is a possibility because I had family members who had left before me. And they were not accepted by the community anyway. And quite honestly, like 15, 20 years ago, anyone who left was excommunicated from their families. And like excommunicated and shunned by their families. But I knew about it, and that was already so much. So I felt like at the first step, I first want Hasidic people to realize that we exist. Hate me if you want, but first realize that we exist. And I would say by now it's pretty much mission accomplished. And while yes, I was the first person who has grown up Hasidic in history, 250 years, to ever come out as trans. Now there have been quite a few more, and it's just been 4 years, and I know quite a few more that are coming, so to speak. So that has already happened. I think a big next step would be to have the Hasidic community to stop shunning their kids. I'm not expecting the community to accept you. You're still going to be out of the community if you come out as trans, and I unfortunately don't see that changing anytime soon. But what I do think can change, that families can still continue to talk to you. I actually believe when I spoke to my father that at least in some ways, and maybe at least by phone, people continue to have a relationship. And I think that is changing a lot. And the thing that we need to change for that is the culture. There needs to be more people. So to my dad, when I left the community, he continued talking to me. He stopped when I came out, though from a religious perspective, leaving the community and eating non-kosher and not keeping Shabbat is a lot more harsh than being trans, specifically being trans, which even from the most orthodox interpretation of Jewish law, there isn't much of a problem in being trans. So to him, it was very clear that it was the shame, so to speak, the not knowing how to deal with that. And while I don't respect that, so to speak, I've come to learn to respect people's beliefs. Right. I have less respect. Like my mom legitimately believes I'm going to hell. And there's a certain part of me that gets that, not the hell part, but the part of, okay, your issue with me is that you legitimately believe that what I'm doing is wrong. With my dad, it's a lot more, oh, what are people going to say? I have a lot less respect for that, but I still wouldn't hate him because, frankly, I know the world that he lives in. And if I start hating people for their beliefs, even if I think that their beliefs are messed up and hateful and bigoted, how am I different than them? Because the way we're not going to change anything by hating them. And I think I have been able to strike a chord. I've been able to find, and I see that from people who reach out to me online. And by definition, Hasidic people that are online are relatively more open. And I would say that somewhere around 50% of the Hasidic community has no internet access whatsoever. So the people who are online are, let's call it the other half, so to speak, but it's still quite a lot of people. And I get so many positive comments, again, more hateful, but still enough positive comments and a lot of them are, oh my God, you don't hate us? And I'm like, no, I don't. And that really helps. But what I'm saying is it's not that I'm pretending not to hate them. I really don't. Why would I hate them? I think they're wrong. I think it's messed up. And I pity them and I wish they would change their opinions. But hate, no, I don't. And my family is relatively extremely loving. I mean, as I came to learn, it's a bit conditional.
Right.
And I am a believer that conditional love does not exist. People always say, "Oh, you only have love it's only real if it's unconditional." Right. But why hate them? Yes, I just don't see any reason to it. Though I will say, for example, I am a parent. I am a mother myself. And
yes.
I try to think sometimes, trying to put myself in my parents' shoes. And I'm trying to think what my son could hypothetically do that would make me excommunicate or make me stop talking to him. And I honestly can't think of anything.
Nothing.
There's things that could get me really angry. Like, I don't know, if he ends up joining some cult. So kind of he is in a cult already. But, or like certain political opinions or certain actions, I will get really angry maybe. But I wouldn't shun him. I really can't think of anything.
These are so wonderful. This is what I'm looking for when I started this, to make meaning. You can't change people by hating them. Love is not real if it's not unconditional. You
can't change. Also, quite frankly, it's bad policy.
Right.
I'm a big fan of pragmatism. If you're trying to change people's mind by hating them, sorry, bad idea.
It just doesn't work. I wanted to ask, and it's interesting you mentioned about your mother thinking you're going to hell. I didn't realize. I remember reading your book. I think it was your Abby Stein had said that because your mother wore gray tights, that she gave up your soul. That she gave up. It's
more complex than that. Okay. No, because she promised. There was So, I mean, if you read the book, you will see the whole story with the tights, and that is a big deal. Yes, the color of the tights really matters. I don't actually believe that, but but so it was more than that. So my grandma always wanted her to wear black tights, but then when I was born and I was sick because I was born a few weeks early, she made a commitment that if I'm going to be healthy, she's going to put on black tights, and then she didn't. So kind of like my grandmother's suggestion, when you put it in context a bit more, it's like, it's kind of her belief that I only survived as a child. And it was at some point, I don't know how dangerous it was, but I was in the NICU and I had 3 blood transfusions and everything. But I only survived because my mom made that commitment. And their idea of God is this very, vengeful Old Testament God, so to speak, who gets like really, hey, you didn't give me your black tithes, and therefore I'm going to steal the soul, something like that, which again, it's stupid if you ask me. But that is a very common theme in Hasidic theology. So my mom, but there was a few other stories. And at the end of the day, it's not my fault at all. There was that. There was also the fact that my mom ate in the sukkah. I don't have time for that story. You know what a sukkah is?
I know what a sukkah is. Yeah.
Maybe, I don't know. We'll be the cover, I don't know, of a single one day. I don't know. I went off the derech because my mom ate in the sukkah, which sounds ridiculous, but it's a longer story. I can actually send you a video of a clip. I said it once at not once, like I was in San Francisco at one speech that came up.
That'd be great. That'd be great. Yeah. It's so interesting. So what is your relationship to Judaism today? How do you practice it? I know for a while it seemed in the book you went completely away from, you gave up Judaism, and now it seems that Romamu, I believe, if you're still there, that you practice it again. What is your relationship to it? How do you practice it?
When I left, I had one of the Rabbi David Ingber, who was actually mentioned in the book as well. He has something that he calls post-God traumatic disorder. I don't know if he coined that or not. Maybe also post-Judaism or post-Hasidic Judaism traumatic disorder, if that's a real thing. But there was a while where I totally left everything. The way I say it, if you put Hasidic community at point 1 on a circle, I made a 180-degree turn. And I think that was an important step for me, because it was important to just reject everything, disregard everything, and realize that I could live my own life.
Right.
And then the way I see it, the way I tell people sometimes, using the analogy of the circle, is I made a 180-degree turn, I destroyed the circle, and then I went and picked up pieces and created my own. Which is how I look on it. I am very proudly Jewish and very engaged in Judaism. And I think there's a lot of messages of Judaism, specifically progressive and modern Judaism, which to some extent based in Hasidic and Kabbalistic theologies, has some very important, very amazing statements. I like to say that I don't observe everything, and it's not just a cool saying. I don't observe, I celebrate. Like when people ask me, oh, do you observe Shabbat? Do you keep Shabbat? I'm like, I don't observe, I celebrate.
That's awesome.
It's not just a cool saying. It's actually the way I look at it. Like 5 years ago, before I came out, and like the year leading up to coming out was probably the harshest, and it was getting really tough. And for a while, I've been struggling with alcohol, and then it went to other drugs as well, and it was getting really tough. And then in December of 2014, which was still quite a few months before I came out, I went sober, which was really one of the best things I ever did. And I've been going for 5 years now, and it's been really amazing. But at the same time, I've been using drugs and alcohol and other things to suppress depression and suppress other feelings that not having that, it came out flooding. And there was a time, specifically during the winter of 2015, it was getting really, really bad. And I think, like I described in the book, as a teenager, where like kind of depression became also very physical to me. At that time, I was at school at the time at Columbia. I was living in a co-op at Columbia, and for a while, I would go to class, come home, and it was a good thing, but also a bad thing that there was food all the time at the home. So I didn't have to go anywhere, not even to dining hall, but just take the food, go to my room and sleep, and not go anywhere. It was getting really bad, and I needed something to ground me, so to speak. And I started doing Shabbat on Friday night, which meant lighting candles every week. I haven't missed a week in close to 5 years now.
You just started by yourself?
Yeah, by myself, but also forcing myself to do something.
Right.
Whatever that meant, going to a service, going to a dinner, or going to watch a movie with friends. It doesn't matter.
Right.
Going out and doing something with people. And that became a very powerful mental health practice that had very little to do. Obviously, yes, it was based on Judaism. To some extent, you could argue that that is what Shabbat was intended to be from the beginning.
Exactly.
But to me, that became, and thankfully, I haven't had to deal with depression since I came out over 4 years, which has been really amazing and a real blessing.
Yes.
And now, so it's almost weird because I started doing this practice, this Friday night Shabbat, this lighting candles, in order to keep me grounded when everything was terrible. And now I use the same thing to keep me grounded because everything is sometimes too good, so to speak. Like I'm like on a speaking tour and it goes really well, and I just forget to stop sometimes. Right. And that is really important to ground me. So it's almost coming full circle. So that is my approach. And I think there's a lot of whatever that's text. I love Jewish text. I love textual resources. And I've done a lot, created curriculums online and so on. And they are very powerful. And I love that. And I've been doing that a lot.
That's awesome. Does that overlap with your activism, the teaching, the education, is your activism within the Hasidic community as well? Can you speak a bit about that?
So, I mean, yeah. First of all, my activism is very grounded, and I would say in the Jewish community, not just the LGBTQ part, but whatever it was that I've been organizing around immigration, whatever it was around a lot of other things that have been happening over the past few years, and you don't have to trust me, you can go online and you will find a lot of videos that have nothing to do with the LGBTQ community over my background, but they are very obviously inspired and informed by my background and by my own experiences. The work within the Hasidic community is mostly limited to raising awareness, mostly by, I guess for the lack of a better word, you got to do dramatic things to get them to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's a reality, because they're not going to talk about it just because you want them to. And the other part is working with people who reach out to me. I can't go into the Hasidic community and talk to people, though one thing that I do a lot to raise awareness, I sometimes would go down to Williamsburg with a camera crew and that gets their attention, but most of them wouldn't talk to me necessarily.
Right.
So, but talking with the people, and unfortunately we're at a point where it's impossible to be LGBTQ of any form, gay or lesbian or bi or trans, and be out and still be part of the Hasidic community. It's not a question of are they gonna can you and how discriminated you're going to get against. You're simply out of the community if you come out. So like it's I unfortunately don't see that changing anytime soon. So it's more of working with people who are reaching out anyway, people who are leaving, supporting people who want to leave, and supporting people who need resources. And the hardest thing is, and I have a few people who are literally running after me who are trans, but they don't want to leave the community. And quite frankly, I don't know what to tell them.
That's so difficult. It's very interesting. I remember in the book you said that you talked about adultery and polygamy are technically permitted by the Torah, but they're culturally unacceptable. So, I mean,
not adultery. I define adultery. Premarital sex is permitted.
It's permitted, but
if both people are single and the woman goes to the mikvah, whatever. But yes, hypothetically, yes.
But culturally unacceptable. And I'm just thinking, if you flip that around, if homosexuality eventually it is forbidden by Jewish law, if it is, but if it becomes culturally acceptable, then why would it not be permitted?
By culturally, I mean culturally within the Hasidic community.
Within the Hasidic community, and that's not going to happen.
When I say that polygamy is culturally, it's even more than culturally. There was actually a cherem for the Ashkenazi Jews, at least. There was a cherem, kind of like a distinct, similar to excommunication for anyone made in the 11th century. Actually, ironically, also inspired by Christianity, I believe, that made polygamy illegal, so to speak, for Ashkenazi Jews, though for other communities like Sephardic and Yemenite Jews, there's still nothing. It's just cultural. But I mean, culturally within the community, they don't care much. I'm not saying they're not influenced by it. They are low-key influenced by the culture outside, but they can perceive something as culturally unacceptable, even if it's totally acceptable in the rest of the world.
Right.
Like it's culturally unacceptable to wear a red blazer for a man. There is literally no law against it, but it doesn't matter. It's still culturally unacceptable.
Interesting. Wow.
Actually, red blazers, ironically, are forbidden for women and culturally unacceptable for men. Yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, women. Red is one of the. Red is a shall not be seen color.
I'll have to read more about that. So you said you did dramatic things to get the attention of the community. What other types of things, besides bringing a camera into the community, are there other things that you did?
I mean, first of all, just leaving. And everyone, I would say everyone, the whole Hasidic community, but at least in Williamsburg and other people, everyone knows about my family, at least partially. So just simply leaving. But because there are some people online, it's like every time, for example, I do something Jewish in my own circles.
Right.
Like I don't know, I read the Megillah, the Book of Esther at Romemu last year on Purim. And I was dressed in a Wonder Woman costume that wasn't modest by Hasidic standards, but it was also in a community that had live music and mixed seating.
Right.
So that was something, and that wasn't even planned. I just didn't care. I've been out for so long, but that is to them so interesting that they end up sharing it. Like every time there's pictures going around of women wearing tefillin, kind of these the straps or the boxes that Hasidic men wear. And to them it's just like, what, woman wearing it? And it becomes such a big deal. So to some extent, simply by living it and sharing my life, it's already so powerful. But also by constantly speaking up, and they end up caring. Like when I show up at a press conference at City Hall, see videos of it, and start talking about my Hasidic background and how they impact anti-Semitism and how I believe that we should not roll back bail reform, for example.
Right. That
ends up coming back to them because they are, as much as they try to shelter themselves from the outside world, they're also extremely curious. But we would call in Yiddish, they're like being a yenta. Someone is just so curious at everything that's happening. They gossip, they live off gossip. It's inevitable that it constantly comes back to them. And sometimes I do things intentionally to get attention, to get their attention, so to speak, because you need to do it in order to accomplish your goal. But most of the time, not even. I just live my life, and it's just so interesting to them.
That's so fascinating. We're kind of getting toward the end of the interview, but I did want to ask you about how you chose your name and the meaning of your name.
Yes. Oh, you asked me. Sorry, I forgot.
That's all right.
Yeah. So here's the thing. I started being active online as a trans woman around the same time as I started being active online. Right. Like my first Facebook I created, I believe, in summer of 2012, and then in September, just a few months after that, I created a Facebook account not as a trans woman. Like it was as a woman, but very openly trans.
Right.
And the name I chose there was Eve, which kind of almost seemed natural, coming from like, Eve, the first woman, and traditionally the woman coming from the man, like that whole story.
Right.
And also, and then interchangeably, like on forums and online, I used Eve or Chava. So Chava is the original Eve, the Hebrew for Eve. So Eve is a mistrans. Originally, it comes in English. It comes from Latin. That comes from Greek. Because throughout, like all the translations, I got Chava became Ava or Ava and Eve, whatever. How it evolved into that. Right. But then when I had to get to a point of actually using that name on a day-to-day business, it didn't click. And I tried it for a while. Like I was going to trans support groups where you can just you can use whichever name you choose. And I tried Eve, Chava, Chavi, which are a Yiddish way or colloquial way of using the name. But I still liked it, and it was still a big part of my identity. And it's also my great-grandmother's name, and that is whatever grandmother, and that is, how Ashkenazi Jews name their kids after their grandparents. So it had a lot of meaning. So I kept that as a middle name. But for my first name, I wanted something that felt more real. It felt more like me. And Abby, which Abby comes from Abigail, which means, the meaning of it in Hebrew is source of joy. Oh. It also comes from the biblical Abigail, which is King David's wife. So she was literally a queen, a queen. But also, according to the Talmud, which is the 6th century rabbinic code, it says that she was one of the 4 most beautiful women to have ever lived. Wow. And it also says that she is considered in Judaism one of the 7 women who were prophet. So there's a very powerful part to it. And Abby, as is a nickname that people know, that's easy. Starbucks isn't messing it up. Right. and it just, most importantly, it felt real. And I think that is what matters most.
Well, that's a wonderful story. You said Abigail means source of joy. You definitely are a source of joy. And is the root of Chava Chai from life?
No one knows exactly where it comes from.
Okay.
I definitely don't see it as being life.
Okay.
Trying to think. Chava means several different words in Hebrew. It means kind of like a farm, but that's not the original meaning of it. I'm trying to think. It's not in the Bible itself. It explains why. It explains the Hebrew word for white, why it's called that, but it doesn't explain her name. And there are many, many different interpretations. But like, if you want to look at it from an academic perspective, I don't think anyone knows exactly where it comes from.
Interesting.
I think in a big way, it's just taken its own meaning by now.
Right. Right. Well, it's a beautiful name, and you definitely are a source of joy. I thank you so much for doing this. It's a blessing for me. And in finishing, I just am curious. Do you have a favorite tights color?
A favorite what?
Color of tight.
Oh, quite ironically, or maybe not, it's actually black.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, lately I've been exploring with a more like opaque black.
Okay.
But I wear a lot of black tights. My grandma would be proud.
Yes. Awesome. Well, on that note, I will say again, this is Joshua Berg with Abby Stein, the author of Becoming Eve, My Journey from Ultra-Orthodox Rabbi to Transgender Woman. And thank you so very much for being my first interviewee. I was a little nervous, so I hope it went okay. But
I think it went great. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
This has been the first episode of Heart, Mind, Spirit Exploration. Thank you for listening.